Jonathan Reed turned off the engine and glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 11:27 p.m. Something immediately felt off. The house wasn't supposed to be awake at this hour. Usually by 11, everything inside was quiet, lights out, kids asleep, and his wife long gone into dreams. But tonight, a warm glow spilled through the curtains of the living room, thin golden stripes cutting through the darkness. He stayed in the car longer than necessary, fingers resting on the steering wheel. A strange uneasiness crept under his skin. Maybe it was just exhaustion. The long drive back from Chicago had drained him. Or maybe it was something else, something his instincts refused to ignore. Jonathan grabbed his leather bag but didn't head to the front door. Instead, he walked quietly along the side of the house, stepping carefully over the stone path, his breath slow and controlled. Voices, low, muffled, but unmistakably real. His heart began to pound harder, not out of fear but anticipation. Something was wrong, and he could feel it with absolute clarity. He moved closer to the living room window and gently leaned toward the narrow gap between the curtain and the frame. Inside, Emily stood near the fireplace. She wore a soft cream sweater and dark jeans, simple, homey, familiar. Her long dark hair was tied loosely, a few strands falling along her cheek. She looked exactly like the woman he had kissed goodbye just 2 days ago, but she wasn't alone. A man stood across from her, tall, broad shoulders, dark jacket. Jonathan's breath caught. There was something familiar about the silhouette. They were arguing. Emily shook her head, tension visible in her posture. Her hands moved nervously, her shoulders stiff. The man leaned closer, speaking in a sharper tone, gesturing with restrained frustration. "No, this is too dangerous." Jonathan caught a fragment of her voice. "Dangerous." The man stepped closer. Emily instinctively moved back, nearly touching the armchair behind her. Jonathan leaned in slightly more, trying to catch a glimpse of the man's face. Crack, a sharp sound under his foot. He froze. A plastic toy, one of Noah's, snapped lightly against the stone. Silence. Inside, both voices stopped instantly. Jonathan held his breath. Seconds passed. Then sudden movement, fast footsteps across the wooden floor. The living room lights went out. A door creaked somewhere in the back. Then an engine. Headlights briefly flashed across the fence as a car sped away into the night. Jonathan stayed still for a moment longer, letting the silence settle again. Then he walked calmly to the front door as if nothing had happened. Inside, the house felt normal again. Too normal. He hung his coat, turned on the light, and called out, "Emily, I'm upstairs." Her voice replied quickly, too quickly. He walked up. She stood near the mirror, removing her earrings. She looked composed, but her hands trembled ever so slightly. "You're back early," she said, forcing a smile. "The meeting ended sooner than expected," Jonathan replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Thought I'd come home, instead of staying at the hotel." "That's good," she said. "The kids will be happy." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Why are you still awake?" he asked casually. The living room light was on. For a split second she froze, then she turned. "Couldn't sleep. I was watching something, some old crime show. Honestly, it was boring." He nodded. It sounded believable. She had insomnia sometimes, especially when he was away. Everything made sense, except the man. Jonathan studied her face. "Did someone stop by?" he asked lightly. "I thought I saw a car leaving." Emily didn't hesitate. "No, probably neighbors." Too smooth, too quick. She walked into the bathroom, turning on the water. Jonathan remained seated, staring at his reflection in the dresser mirror. 43 years old, a successful business, 2 children, a beautiful wife, a life built carefully, piece by piece. And yet, something had shifted. He felt it clearly now, like the pressure before a storm. That night sleep never came. He lay beside Emily, listening to her calm breathing, watching the faint outline of her face in the moonlight. She looked peaceful, perfect. familiar, and suddenly, completely unknown. Morning came with noise instead of calm. Jonathan woke up to the sound of dishes clinking, children laughing, and something else, haste. The house felt unusually restless, like everyone was moving half a step too fast. He checked the time. 8:02 a.m. Too early for a Saturday to feel this busy. When he walked into the kitchen, Emily stood by the stove flipping pancakes. The smell was warm and inviting, but her movements were sharp, almost mechanical. Her shoulders were tense, and she avoided looking at him. Their daughter Lily sat at the table with a workbook open, while 6-year-old Noah built something complicated on the floor out of plastic blocks. "Morning," Jonathan said, leaning in to kiss Emily on the cheek. "Morning," she replied softly. "Too soft." "Dad, Mom said you came late," Lily said, glancing up. "Yeah, work ran long," he answered, pouring himself coffee. "What's the plan today?" Emily placed a plate in front of him. Her fingers trembled slightly. "I have a meeting," she said, keeping her eyes on the stove. "A client, interior project. I need to show fabric samples." "On a Saturday." She shrugged. "Some clients don't care about weekends." "What time?" 11. "Where?" "A new design center on the west side." She said it too quickly. Jonathan took a slow sip of coffee, watching her carefully. "Need a ride?" he asked casually. "No," she replied immediately, too sharply, then softened her tone. "I'll take my car, you should rest." There it was again, that subtle edge, that quiet urgency to keep him away. 30 minutes later she came downstairs fully dressed. Black coat, high boots, hair pulled into a flawless professional bun, perfect, untouchable. She kissed the kids, grabbed her bag, and left. Jonathan waited, 5 minutes, 10. Then he turned to Lily. "Hey, can you keep an eye on your brother for a bit?" "Are we still going to the park?" she asked. "Of course, just a little later." Outside, a light drizzle blurred the edges of the street. Fog rolled in slowly, wrapping the neighborhood in a gray veil. Jonathan got into his car and started the engine. His heart beat steadily now, not from fear, from certainty. He spotted her car 15 minutes later, a silver sedan, but she wasn't heading west. She was going the opposite direction. Jonathan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, so she lied, without hesitation, without blinking. He kept his distance, 3 cars behind. The fog thickened. Rain streaked across the windshield. The city looked unfamiliar, distorted. Emily drove strangely, too deliberately. Right turn, then left, then another right, like she was checking if someone followed her, or maybe she was used to being followed. At one turn, Jonathan nearly lost her. The fog swallowed the road ahead, her taillights fading into gray. Damn it. He accelerated slightly and then saw it. A turn he followed, and there. A restaurant, upscale, glass walls, golden signage glowing through the mist. Emily's car stood in the parking lot. Jonathan parked farther away in the shadows. From there he watched. She stepped out of the car, no bag, no fabric samples, just a small purse. So much for the client meeting. She walked inside without hesitation, like she had done this before. Jonathan checked the time. 11:18 a.m. He leaned back in his seat and waited. Rain tapped steadily against the roof. Minutes passed, then an hour. Each second stretched longer than the last. Finally, the door opened. Emily stepped out. But she wasn't alone. A man walked beside her, holding a large black umbrella over both of them. Jonathan's chest tightened. The same silhouette, same height, same build, the man from last night. They walked slowly toward her car, talking, close, too close. Jonathan couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He saw enough. Emily got into her car. The man remained standing for a second longer, watching her, then turned and disappeared into the fog. Jonathan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. There was no doubt now, no excuses, no misunderstandings. She was lying, and whoever that man was, he wasn't a stranger. Emily's engine started, her brake lights flashed red. She pulled out quickly. Jonathan followed, this time. She drove differently, fast, precise, calculated. Switching lanes, using traffic, trying to disappear. At one intersection, she slowed down. The light turned green, she didn't move. Then, yellow, she accelerated suddenly and slipped through. Jonathan hit the brakes. Red. By the time the light changed, she was gone, swallowed by the city. Jonathan sat there for a second, still, silent, then exhaled slowly. Now he knew not everything but enough. And this was only the beginning. Jonathan drove home slowly, barely noticing the road. His mind replayed the same images over and over. Emily under that umbrella, the man beside her, the way she leaned slightly toward him as they spoke. Too natural, too familiar. When he stepped inside, the house felt exactly as it always had. Warm, safe, normal. Lily sat at the table doing homework, her blonde ponytail swaying as she wrote. Noah lay on the floor watching cartoons, completely absorbed. "Dad, when are we going to the park?" Noah asked without looking away from the screen. "Soon," Jonathan said, forcing a calm tone. "A little later." "When's Mom coming back?" Lily added, "In the evening." He paused, at least that's what she said. Emily returned around 7:15 p.m. Jonathan was already waiting, not obviously, just present. Standing in the hallway as she walked in, he watched her carefully. Her expression was composed, slightly tired, but behind her eyes there was something else. Alertness, like she was measuring him, trying to understand what he knew. "How was the meeting?" he asked casually, helping her take off her coat. "Good," she replied smoothly. The client liked several options, might be a big project. She walked into the living room, greeting the kids, kissing them, asking about their day. Everything looked perfect. A normal evening, a normal family, but Jonathan saw it now. Every small detail, every avoided glance, every unnecessary movement. At dinner, she talked more than usual about work, about new projects, about things they needed to buy, anything. Except what mattered. Jonathan barely listened. He watched, analyzed, connected the pieces. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Emily went to take a shower. Jonathan remained downstairs, holding a book he hadn't read a single page of. His thoughts circled one question. Who is he? At midnight, she came out in a light silk nightgown, her dark hair loose over her shoulders. "I'm exhausted," she said quietly. "I'm going to bed." "I'll come later," Jonathan replied without looking up. She kissed his forehead. Soft, familiar, empty. He waited 30 minutes, then went upstairs. Emily lay on her side, breathing evenly, asleep, or pretending. He couldn't tell anymore. Jonathan lay beside her for nearly an hour, staring at the ceiling. Then, silently, he got up. Outside, the night was cold and clear. The fog had vanished. The sky was sharp with stars. Emily's car stood in its usual place. Unlocked, she never locked it at home. Jonathan opened the door carefully. The interior light flickered on. Everything looked normal, too normal. He checked the seats. Nothing. The glove compartment, documents, pens, tissues, routine. Then, underneath, a stack of papers. Receipts. His pulse quickened. He took them out, turning on his phone flashlight. First receipt. The restaurant, today's date, dinner for two, salmon, pasta, wine. Second receipt, a week ago, another restaurant, 2 meals. Third, 2 weeks ago. Same pattern. Jonathan's jaw tightened. These weren't business meetings. These were dates. He took photos of each receipt, then carefully placed them back exactly as they were. Closed the glove compartment, stepped out, locked nothing, left no trace. As he approached the house, he froze. A sound, a floorboard creaking inside. The front door slowly opened. Emily stepped out, barefoot, wearing only her nightgown. Jonathan instantly moved into the shadows near the garage. His heart pounded violently. She looked around, carefully, almost fearfully. then walked straight to her car. She circled it, checked the doors, the wheels, even crouched slightly as if inspecting underneath. Like she was afraid someone had touched it. Jonathan clenched his fists, so she suspected. She felt something. She stood there for a long moment, listening, watching. Then suddenly, she lifted her head and looked straight toward the garage, right where he stood, hidden, frozen. For a second, he thought she saw him, but she didn't move, didn't call out, just stared into the darkness. Then slowly turned away, walked back to the house, closed the door behind her. Jonathan stayed in place for another full minute, then exhaled. When he returned upstairs, Emily lay in bed again, facing the wall, but her breathing was wrong, too fast, too shallow. She was awake, so now. They both knew, not everything, but enough, and whatever this was, it was far bigger than just an affair. Morning didn't bring clarity, it made everything worse. Jonathan woke to the sound of laughter outside. For a brief second, everything felt normal again. Then reality returned. He looked out the window. Emily stood near the porch, watering flowers. Her dark hair was tied in a loose ponytail, sunlight catching soft strands around her face. She looked calm, too calm. The kids ran across the yard, chasing a ball, their laughter light and carefree. A perfect scene, a perfect illusion. Jonathan went downstairs, made coffee, waited. Emily entered the kitchen a minute later. White blouse, light makeup, controlled expression, but under her eyes, shadows. Didn't sleep well, he asked. Not really, she replied, pouring coffee, just tired. They sat in silence, a heavy, suffocating silence. Then her phone buzzed. She flinched, just slightly, but enough. She glanced at the screen. "Client," she said quickly and declined the call. Jonathan didn't respond. He didn't need to. An hour later, the kids came back inside. Lily held something in her hand. "Dad, look what I found." She placed it on the table, a lighter, gold, expensive. Jonathan picked it up, heavy, elegant, engraved, the letter M. "Where did you find it?" he asked. "Near Mom's car," Lily said. Emily walked in, saw the lighter, and in that instant, her mask cracked just for a second, but Jonathan saw it, clear as day. She quickly stepped forward and took it from his hand. "That's for your dad," she said, forcing a smile. "I bought it yesterday. It's a gift." Lily frowned. "But Dad doesn't smoke." "It's for the fireplace," Emily replied smoothly. "Very convenient." The girl shrugged and ran off. Jonathan didn't move, didn't blink. "A gift," he said quietly. Emily turned toward the sink, her back to him. "What are you implying?" "That it's not mine." Silence, then she slowly turned, her eyes tired, cornered. "You're right," she said quietly. She placed the lighter on the table. "It's not yours." Jonathan waited. "Last night," she continued, "Mark stopped by. Work-related, he must have dropped it." Mark Carter. Jonathan's chest tightened. His business partner, his friend, the man he trusted with everything. The same build, the same silhouette, the same presence. Everything clicked into place. "I didn't see him," Jonathan said. "You were asleep," she replied quickly, too quickly. He nodded slowly. The explanation made sense, on the surface. But the lie came too easily. Why didn't she tell him? Why hide it? Why lie to their daughter? Jonathan walked outside, sat on the bench. The pieces were aligning. And he hated the picture they formed. The man in the house, the restaurant, the receipts, the lighter, the lies, Mark, his closest ally, his right hand in business. And now, something else. Jonathan pulled out his phone, opened contacts, found Mark's name. His thumb hovered over the call button, but he didn't press it, not yet, because instinct told him. This wasn't just betrayal. This was something deeper, more dangerous. And if he made the wrong move, he could lose everything. He looked back at the house, at the life he had built over 12 years, at the woman he once trusted without question, and made a decision. He would not confront them, not yet. He would watch, listen, collect, and when the time came, he would destroy everything they were hiding. Because now, this was no longer about love, this was war. Mark moved too quickly, too precisely. Jonathan didn't say anything at first. He simply watched as Mark pressed napkins against the papers, absorbing the spreading stain. The coffee had soaked into the exact lines where the financial partner's details were listed. A coincidence, or something much worse? "Relax," Jonathan said evenly after a pause. "We've got digital copies." Yeah, of course," Mark replied, already gathering the damp documents. "I'll print fresh ones." He avoided eye contact. That was new. Mark Carter had never avoided eye contact. The conversation ended shortly after that, but Jonathan didn't leave immediately. He lingered just long enough to make Mark uncomfortable, just long enough to confirm what his instincts had already begun to whisper. Something was wrong. And it wasn't small. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine, but Jonathan wasn't truly present. He spoke with clients, signed off on minor decisions, answered calls, but his mind remained fixed on one thing: patterns, connections, hidden threads. That evening, when most of the staff had already left, he locked himself in his office again and began going through months of archived data. One deal led to another to a third, and then a pattern became undeniable. 5 suspicious transactions, different clients, different cars, but the same structure: fragmented payments, delayed deliveries, no confirmed transfers to suppliers. Jonathan leaned back slowly, the realization settling in like ice beneath his skin. Mark wasn't just bending the rules, he was stealing. The numbers told the story clearly. Millions had passed through the system and disappeared. Jonathan closed his eyes for a moment, not in shock, not even in anger, in calculation, because now the question had changed. It was no longer, "Is something wrong?" It was, "How deep does this go?" And more importantly, was Emily part of it? He didn't have to wait long for an answer. The idea of the lake trip came to him suddenly, but once it appeared, it felt right, too right. "Let's get out of the city this weekend," Jonathan said casually during dinner on Friday. "Take the kids, go to the lake house." Emily froze for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but he saw it. "The lake," she repeated, setting down her fork. "Why so far? Maybe we could just go to the park, or—" "No," he interrupted gently. "The lake, the kids will love it." Lily immediately lit up. "Really? The one with the boats?" "And the horses," Noah added excitedly. Jonathan smiled faintly. "Yes, that one." Emily looked from the children to him, and in her eyes, for just a moment, he saw it, not hesitation, not annoyance, something closer to panic. "I have work," she said finally. "A big client. Monday is important." "We'll be back Sunday," Jonathan replied calmly. "You'll have time." Silence stretched between them. Then, "Okay," she said quietly, too quietly. They left early Saturday morning. The road stretched ahead, framed by pine trees and distant hills. The further they drove, the weaker the signal became, until eventually there was nothing. No calls, no messages, no connection to the outside world. Exactly as Jonathan had planned. The lake house stood isolated near the water, surrounded by tall trees and silence. It was peaceful, beautiful, and completely cut off. The children ran ahead immediately, laughing, exploring, filling the quiet with life. Emily unpacked their things inside. Jonathan stood on the porch for a moment, watching the lake shimmer under the afternoon sun. Then he turned and watched her instead. She moved normally, almost perfectly. But there was tension in her shoulders, a slight stiffness in her movements, and most importantly, she checked her phone, constantly, even though there was no signal. After lunch, they walked down to the lake. Jonathan showed Noah how to cast a fishing line, guiding his small hands patiently. Lily gathered wildflowers nearby, humming softly to herself. Emily sat in a folding chair, a book open in her lap, but she never turned a page. "I'm going for a walk," she said suddenly after a while. Jonathan looked up. "Want company?" "No," she replied quickly. Then softer, "Stay with the kids." He nodded, but watched her go. She didn't walk far, at least. That's what she wanted them to think. Jonathan waited a few minutes, then stood up quietly and followed. The forest paths were dim, shadows stretching between the trees. He moved carefully, keeping distance, staying out of sight. Emily walked toward the far side of the lake, not toward the main building. Not toward the open paths, somewhere more secluded. She stopped near the water, looked around, then pulled out her phone. Jonathan crouched behind a large rock close enough to hear. "Hey, it's me," she said softly. A pause. "Not now, the kids are here." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I know," she continued, "but he's watching me all the time." Another pause. "Just a little longer, okay?" The wind moved gently across the water. Jonathan didn't move at all. "Everything with the documents is fine," Emily said quietly. "He doesn't suspect anything." That was it, not just betrayal, involvement. "Just one more month," she added. A long silence followed. Then her voice changed, softened, warmed. "I love you too." Jonathan felt something inside him go completely still. No anger, no shock. Just clarity. He slowly stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and disappeared into the trees. By the time Emily returned, he was already back at the lake, teaching Noah how to cast again, smiling, calm, as if nothing had happened, but inside, everything had changed because now he knew. This wasn't just an affair, this wasn't just fraud, this was a plan, and whatever they were preparing, it would end in 1 month, and when it did, Jonathan would be ready. The drive back from the lake was quiet, too quiet. The children filled the silence at first, talking over each other, laughing, arguing about small things that didn't matter. Their voices should have felt comforting, grounding. Instead, they sounded distant to Jonathan, like echoes from another life. Emily sat in the passenger seat, turned slightly toward the window. She barely spoke. Every now and then she checked her phone, even though the signal only returned in short, flickering intervals as they approached the city. Each time the screen lit up, her posture shifted. Subtle, but visible. Jonathan noticed everything now, every glance, every breath, every pause that lasted a second too long. When they finally reached home, evening had already settled in. The familiar outline of the house stood under soft streetlights, unchanged. But for Jonathan, it no longer felt like home. That night, after the children fell asleep, he didn't confront her. He didn't even try. Instead, he went downstairs, poured himself a drink, and sat alone in the dark living room, thinking, planning, if Emily and Mark were working together. Then this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about timing, about intention. 1 more month. That phrase echoed in his mind. What were they waiting for? Another deal, a final transfer, or something worse? Jonathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into nothing. Then slowly, he began to build a plan, not emotional, not impulsive, precise. The next morning he acted like everything was normal, even better than normal. He made breakfast, helped Noah with his homework, drove Lily to school, kissed Emily goodbye like he used to, and she noticed. He saw it in her eyes, the confusion, the relief, the doubt. Good, let her relax. Over the next few days, Jonathan moved carefully. He gathered evidence quietly, methodically. Downloaded financial records, backed up internal reports, copied email chains, but that wasn't enough. He needed certainty, not assumptions, not guesses, proof. On Wednesday morning, he made his move. "I've got to leave for a few days," he said casually over breakfast. "Seattle, big partnership deal." Emily looked up, and for a split second, her eyes lit up. She tried to hide it, but she failed. "How long?" she asked. "3 days." She nodded too quickly. The children groaned. Again. Lily said. Jonathan smiled. "I'll make it up to you." Then he turned to Emily. "Maybe you should take them to my parents for the weekend. They've been asking." Another flicker, another flash of relief. "That's actually a good idea," she said. Of course it was. By evening the kids were gone, dropped off, safe. Jonathan packed his suitcase deliberately, left the house, drove away, and disappeared, but not where she thought. Instead of the airport, he checked into a small hotel 2 miles from home, a place no one would think to look. For the next day he stayed inside, watching, waiting, preparing. By Thursday night everything was ready. He had copies of every fraudulent transaction, every forged signature, every suspicious deal, enough to destroy Mark completely. Now, all that remained was the truth about Emily. Saturday evening, Jonathan returned on foot. He left his car 2 blocks away and approached the house slowly, keeping to the shadows. The lights were on, soft, warm, and in the driveway, 2 cars, Emily's and Mark's. Jonathan stopped for a moment, just stood there, breathing, no anger, no hesitation, only certainty. He moved closer, carefully. From the open window, soft jazz music drifted into the night. Emily's favorite, of course. He waited, not rushing, not reacting. 30 minutes passed. Then he walked to the door, unlocked it, stepped inside. Everything was quiet, familiar, too familiar. He took off his shoes, hung his coat, moved through the house like a ghost. Upstairs. The music faded. A door stood slightly open. Warm light spilling into the hallway. Jonathan approached, slowly, and looked inside. The world didn't explode this time, it collapsed. Emily lay on the bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her skin bare against the sheets. Mark was beside her, close, intimate, not hidden, not careful, comfortable. That was the worst part. Jonathan stepped into the room, quietly. They didn't notice him at first, and for a second, just 1 second, he saw them as they truly were, not lovers, conspirators. Then Emily turned her head, and everything shattered. Emily saw him first. For a fraction of a second, her face went completely blank, as if her mind refused to process what her eyes were telling her. Then the realization hit, sharp, violent. She gasped and instinctively pulled the sheet over herself, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold it. "Jonathan!" Her voice broke. Mark turned a second later and froze. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy, unnatural. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, that more than anything unsettled them. No shouting, no immediate rage, just stillness. "I was going to wait," he said quietly. His voice was calm, too calm. Emily shook her head, panic flooding her features. "Jonathan, please, this isn't—" "Don't," he interrupted. One word, sharp enough to cut through her completely. Mark shifted, slowly standing up from the bed, trying to regain control of the situation. "Listen," he said carefully, raising his hand slightly. "We can talk about this like adults." Jonathan's gaze snapped to him, and something cold flickered in his eyes. "Adults," Jonathan repeated softly. He took a step forward, then another. "You come into my house," he continued, voice steady, "sleep with my wife, steal from my business." A pause, "And you want to talk like adults." Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced briefly at Emily as if expecting support. She said nothing. That was his answer. Jonathan stopped a few feet away from him, close enough now. "You're going to get dressed," he said calmly, "and you're going to leave." Mark hesitated, just for a second. Then he nodded, because he understood. This wasn't a negotiation. Emily's breathing became uneven, her eyes darting between them. Jonathan, please let me explain. He turned to her slowly, and for the first time. There was emotion in his face. Not anger, not even hatred, disappointment. Explain what? He asked quietly. That you lied to me for months. That you brought him into our home. That you stood in front of our children and pretended everything was fine. Tears streamed down her face. I didn't mean for it to. He cut her off again. You told him you loved him. Silence, her lips parted, but no words came. Jonathan held her gaze, unmoving. I heard you, he said, by the lake. That broke her. Emily's shoulders collapsed, as if whatever strength she had left simply gave out. Mark, now dressed, stepped forward carefully. Look, whatever you think is going on, we can fix this. Jonathan laughed, quietly, but there was nothing warm in it. Fix, he repeated. Then his expression changed again, hardened. No, he said, there's nothing left to fix. He walked past Mark and opened the bedroom door wider. You have two options, Jonathan continued, his tone turning colder with each word. You walk out of here right now, or I call the police. Mark froze. Jonathan met his eyes, and for the first time. Mark saw it, not a husband, not a friend, a man who had already decided everything. You won't, Mark said, but there was no confidence behind it. Jonathan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone. Try me. That was enough. Mark exhaled slowly, then walked past him without another word. A few seconds later, the front door closed, and the house fell silent again. Only Emily remained. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the sheet around herself, shaking uncontrollably. Jonathan didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there looking at her, at the woman he had built a life with, the mother of his children, the person he had trusted more than anyone else. And now, someone he barely recognized. I didn't want it to happen like this, she whispered. Jonathan's expression didn't change. How did you want it to happen? He asked quietly. She looked up at him, her eyes red, desperate. I was going to tell you, she said. When? No answer. He nodded slightly, as if that was exactly what he expected. And the money? He asked. That made her freeze again. Jonathan stepped closer, slowly. You knew, he said, not a question. Her silence confirmed it. How much? He continued. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I wasn't part of everything. But you knew. A whisper, yes. That was enough. Jonathan closed his eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again, and whatever had been left inside him was gone. Get dressed, he said. Her head snapped up. You're leaving too. Emily didn't move at first. She just stared at him as if the words hadn't fully reached her yet. Then they did, and something inside her seemed to collapse all over again. Jonathan, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't do this. He didn't respond. That silence, calm, heavy, final, was far more terrifying than any anger could have been. I'll fix everything, she rushed, wiping tears with shaking hands. I'll end it, I swear. I'll tell you everything. I'll help you with Mark, with the business, everything. Just don't throw me out. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment, not with cruelty, not with satisfaction, with distance. You already threw yourself out, he said quietly. The words landed harder than any shout. Emily's breath caught. She shook her head, stepping off the bed, clutching the sheet around her like it could protect her from what was happening. What about the kids? She said desperately. You can't just, Jonathan, they need both of us. We can fix this. People fix things like this. He almost smiled, almost. No, he said, people survive things like this, they don't fix them. She took a step toward him, then another. Please, I made a mistake. Jonathan's eyes sharpened slightly. A mistake, he repeated, is forgetting a meeting, missing a call, saying something you regret. He paused. This was a choice, repeated, planned. She flinched, and the worst part. He continued, his voice still low, controlled. You looked me in the eyes every day and lied without hesitation. Yes. Emily covered her face with one hand, sobbing now. I was scared, she said. You don't understand. Then explain it, he said. That stopped her. For the first time since he walked into that room, there was no interruption, no anger cutting her off, just a direct question. She lowered her hand slowly, looked at him, and spoke. It started with Mark, she said quietly. Work meetings, late nights, you were traveling all the time. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. I felt invisible, like everything was about business, about deals, about numbers. Jonathan didn't react, and he noticed, she continued. He listened. He paid attention. At first it was just talking, then it was. Silence. I didn't plan it, she added weakly. Jonathan tilted his head slightly. No, he said, you just didn't stop it. She looked down, unable to argue. And the money? He asked again, her shoulders tensed. I didn't take anything, she said quickly. I swear, but I knew he was doing something. I didn't ask questions. Because you didn't want the answers. A tear slid down her cheek. Yes. The honesty came too late. Jonathan nodded slowly. So you lied to me, he said. You helped him by staying silent, and you planned something with him. Her eyes widened. It wasn't like that. You said 1 more month, Jonathan cut in. What happens in a month? She froze completely, that silence. Told him everything. Jonathan stepped back slightly, exhaling through his nose. Right, he said quietly. He turned away from her for a moment, running a hand through his hair. Not out of stress, out of finality, when he looked back. There was nothing left in his expression. You'll pack your things tonight, he said. Take whatever you need. Her lips trembled. And tomorrow, he continued, we'll talk about the kids properly, calmly. She nodded slowly, broken. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. Jonathan paused at the doorway for a second. Just one. Something flickered in his eyes, then disappeared. That's the problem, he said quietly, and walked out. Downstairs, the house felt unbearably quiet. Every object in the room seemed unchanged. But meaningless. Jonathan poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window. Outside, the street was empty, still. He stared into the darkness. The truth was finally complete. His wife had betrayed him. His partner had stolen from him, and together. They had been planning something bigger, but now. Everything had changed because they thought they were ahead. They thought they had time. They thought he didn't know. Jonathan took a slow breath. They were wrong, and now. The final move belonged to him. That night the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a waiting room. Jonathan didn't sleep, not even for a minute. He sat in the living room until dawn, the lights off, watching the faint outline of the street through the window as the sky slowly shifted from black to gray. Upstairs he could hear movement at times, soft steps, drawers opening, suitcases. Emily was packing. He didn't go up. There was nothing left to say. By morning, everything inside him had settled into something cold and stable. Not pain, not anger, something sharper, control. When Emily came downstairs, she looked different, not just tired, smaller, as if something essential had been stripped away. Her hair was loosely tied, her face pale, eyes swollen from crying. She held herself carefully like someone afraid of breaking further. Coffee? She asked quietly. Jonathan shook his head. Silence stretched between them. We should talk about the kids, she said after a moment, her voice fragile but controlled. He nodded, sat across from her, and just like that, they became two strangers negotiating a life that used to be theirs. They shouldn't know everything, Emily said. Not now. They're too young. Yes. I agree, Jonathan replied. We tell them we're separating, that it's mutual. Jonathan looked at her for a second too long. Nothing about this was mutual, he said calmly. She flinched. But they don't need to carry that, he added. She nodded slowly. What about living arrangements? She asked. You'll stay with your sister for now, Jonathan said. We'll work out something more permanent later. In the house. I'll stay here. The kids will stay here. That one hurt her, he saw it, but she didn't argue. Okay, she whispered, another silence, then. Jonathan. He didn't respond. I know I don't deserve anything from you, she said carefully, but don't take everything away from me. Not the kids, not my life. Jonathan leaned back slightly, studying her. You already risked all of that, he said. Her eyes filled again. I know. And for the first time. There was no defense in her voice, only acceptance. That mattered, but not enough. There's something else, Jonathan said. She tensed. Mark. The name alone changed the air in the room. He's finished, Jonathan continued. I have everything, the fraud, the signatures, the money. Emily closed her eyes. I didn't take anything, she said again, almost instinctively. I know, he replied, but you knew. A tear slipped down her cheek. Yes. That makes you part of it. She swallowed hard. What are you going to do? She asked. Jonathan stood up slowly, walked to the window. Outside, the world carried on like nothing had happened. Cars passed, people walked. Life continued. I'm going to end it, he said. She looked up. How? Jonathan turned slightly, properly. There was something in his tone. Final, unmovable, and suddenly. Emily understood. Jonathan, don't, she said, panic rising again. If this goes public, it destroys everything. The business, your name. It's already destroyed, he said quietly. That's not true. It is, he interrupted. You just don't see it yet. She stood up now, stepping toward him. We can handle this privately, she insisted. Talk to him, make him return the money, don't go to the police. Jonathan looked at her, really looked. You're still protecting him, he said. That stopped her. I know, I just. You love him, Jonathan said. The truth hung between them, and she didn't deny it. That was answer enough. Jonathan nodded once. Then you should go, he said. Her breath caught. Before I stop caring what happens to either of you. That was the final line. Emily stood there for a few seconds, then slowly turned, picked up her suitcase. At the door, she paused. I'm sorry, she said quietly. Jonathan didn't respond. The door closed, and just like that. 12 years of marriage ended with a sound so simple it almost felt unreal. Jonathan stood alone in the house, silent, still, but this wasn't the end. Not yet, because one part remained unfinished, and it had a name, Mark Carter. The house felt different after she left, not emptier. Clearer. Jonathan stood in the hallway for a long time after the door closed, listening to the silence settle into every corner. There were no more hidden movements, no tension hanging in the air, no quiet lies disguised as normal life, just stillness. He walked into the living room and sat down slowly, resting his hands on his knees. For the first time in weeks, his thoughts weren't scattered. They aligned. Mark. Everything now led back to him. The fraud, the lies, the affair. And whatever they had been planning for one more month. Jonathan stood up, went to his office, and opened his laptop. Every file was already prepared, every transaction documented, every inconsistency highlighted. He didn't rush. This wasn't about revenge. This was about finishing something properly. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Mark's name, paused, then pressed call. It rang once, twice. Yeah. Mark's voice came through, guarded, tense. We need to talk, Jonathan said, silence on the other end. About what? Mark asked carefully. Jonathan almost smiled. You know exactly about what. Another pause, longer this time. Fine, Mark said finally. Where? Jonathan looked out the window. The office, he replied. 1 hour. And then he hung up. No more words, no more games. Mark arrived exactly on time. Of course he did. He had always been precise, reliable, disciplined. Jonathan was already waiting in his office, the same room where they had built their business together, where they had made plans, signed deals, celebrated success. Now, it felt like a courtroom. Mark stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He looked composed, but not confident. "All right," he said, keeping his tone controlled. "Let's talk." Jonathan gestured toward the chair. "Sit." Mark hesitated, then sat. Jonathan didn't. He remained standing, hands in his pockets, watching him for a few seconds. Neither of them spoke. Then Jonathan walked to the desk, picked up a folder, and dropped it in front of Mark. "Open it." Mark didn't move at first, then slowly reached forward and flipped it open. The color drained from his face almost instantly. Page after page, transactions, signatures, comparisons, evidence, everything. Jonathan watched him carefully. "How long?" he asked. Mark exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "About 6 months." "Honest, at least now. How much?" Mark hesitated. "Say it," Jonathan said. "Just over 4 million." The number hung in the air, heavy. Jonathan nodded once. "And the plan?" he asked. Mark looked up sharply. "What plan?" Jonathan stepped closer. "Don't insult me." Silence. Mark leaned back in the chair, staring at the documents, thinking, calculating. Then he made a decision. "We were going to finish a few more deals," he said quietly. "Clean everything up. Move the money through the partner accounts. And then—" Mark didn't answer immediately. Jonathan's voice dropped. "And then what?" "Leave," Mark said. The word landed like a final confirmation. Jonathan didn't react. "Together?" he asked. Mark looked away. "Yes." There it was, no more doubt, no more questions. Jonathan turned slightly, walking a few steps toward the window for a moment. He said nothing. Then, "Emily knows everything?" he asked. Mark nodded. "She didn't touch the money," he added quickly. "She just knew," Jonathan finished. "Yes." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, and whatever was left of the past disappeared. He turned back. "You're going to return every dollar," he said calmly. Mark let out a quiet breath. "That's not how this works." "It is now." Their eyes locked. Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. "I have everything," he continued. "You walk out of here today and I go to the police. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement." Mark's jaw tightened. "You think I'll just hand it back?" he said. Jonathan took another step closer. "No," he said quietly. "I think you'll do it because you don't have a choice." Silence, heavy, absolute for the first time. Mark Carter looked uncertain, and Jonathan knew. The balance had shifted completely. Mark didn't answer immediately. He sat there staring at the documents, his fingers pressed against the edge of the folder as if he could somehow push reality away just by holding onto it. But there was no way out of this. Not anymore. "You're serious," he said finally, his voice lower now. Jonathan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Mark let out a slow breath and leaned back in the chair, looking up at the ceiling for a moment, as if calculating options that no longer existed. When he looked back at Jonathan, something had changed. Less arrogance, more realism. "Even if I wanted to," Mark said, "it's not that simple." "It is," Jonathan replied. "No," Mark shook his head. "The money isn't just sitting in one place, it's been moved, reinvested, split across accounts." Jonathan stepped closer. "Then you'll move it back." Mark gave a short, humorless laugh. "You don't understand how this works." Jonathan's expression didn't change. "You don't understand your position," he said quietly. Silence. Mark studied him, really studied him this time, and what he saw Finally, was not a man he could manipulate. "You're not bluffing," Mark said. "No." Another pause. "If I give it back," Mark continued slowly, "you walk away." Jonathan tilted his head slightly. "You think this is negotiation?" he asked. Mark's jaw tightened. "You get your money, your business stays intact. No scandal, no investigation," he said. "You walk away clean." Jonathan took a step closer to the desk and placed both hands on it, leaning in just enough to close the distance between them. "You don't get to offer me clean," he said quietly. Mark held his gaze. For a moment, the tension between them felt almost physical. Then Jonathan straightened. "You return everything," he said. "Every dollar, every account, every transaction." And then Mark asked. Jonathan paused, and for the first time, there was something colder than control in his voice. "Then I decide what to do with you." That landed. Mark looked away first. For a man who had always been in control, always 2 steps ahead, it was unfamiliar territory, and he didn't like it. "I need time," Mark said. "You have 48 hours." Mark looked back up. "That's not enough." "It's more than you deserve." Silence, then slowly. Mark nodded. "Fine." He stood up, closing the folder carefully, as if the act itself required precision. "I'll call you," he said. Jonathan didn't move. "No," he replied, "you won't." Mark frowned slightly. "You'll send me everything," Jonathan continued. "Account details, transfers, proof." "And if I don't?" Jonathan met his eyes. "Then I make one call," he said. "No threats, no raised voice, just fact." Mark held his gaze for another second, then gave a small nod. "All right." Yes. He turned and walked toward the door, but before leaving, he stopped. "You know," Mark said without turning around, "you weren't always like this." Jonathan didn't respond. "You used to trust people," Mark added quietly. Now Jonathan almost smiled. "That was the problem," he said. Mark exhaled softly, then left. The door closed behind him. Jonathan remained alone in the office. For a long time he didn't move. Then slowly he walked to the window. Outside, the city moved like nothing had changed. Cars passed, people talked, life continued. But inside, everything had shifted. The illusion was gone, and in its place, something sharper had formed. Not anger, not revenge. Clarity. Jonathan pulled out his phone and looked at the screen for a moment, then locked it again. There was still one thing left to do, not with Mark. That part was already unfolding with Emily, because betrayal didn't end with truth. It ended with consequences, and he was finally ready to face them. Emily didn't expect him to come. She had chosen her sister's house because it felt safe. Quiet suburban streets, familiar walls, a place where nothing truly bad had ever happened. The kind of place where problems were supposed to soften, not sharpen. But she hadn't slept. Not really. When the doorbell rang that afternoon, she froze in the kitchen, her hands tightening around the edge of the counter. She knew, before even moving. She knew it was him. Her sister called out from the living room, "Em, someone's here." "I've got it," Emily said quickly, too quickly. She walked to the door slowly, her heartbeat loud in her ears, and opened it. Jonathan stood there, calm, composed, distant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Up close, she could see it clearly now. Whatever had once lived in his eyes when he looked at her was gone. "Can we talk?" he asked. She nodded, stepped aside. They didn't sit in the living room. Emily led him instead to the small guest room at the back of the house. It was quieter there, more private, more contained. Jonathan closed the door behind them. The silence stretched. "I spoke to Mark," he said. Emily's breath caught. "What did he say?" she asked carefully. Jonathan watched her. "The truth," he replied. That word alone made her shoulders tense. She looked down. "I didn't take any money," she said again, almost automatically. "I know," Jonathan said. That surprised her. She looked up. But you knew, he added. She nodded, slowly. Yes. No excuses this time. No deflection. Jonathan took a step closer, but not too close, just enough to make the space between them feel deliberate. Why didn't you stop it? He asked. The question was simple, but it hit harder than anything else. Emily swallowed. I told myself it wasn't my place, she said quietly. That it was your business, that I didn't understand everything. Jonathan's expression didn't change. And the real reason? He asked. She hesitated, then forced herself to answer. Because if I pushed him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, he might have pushed me away. There it was, Jonathan exhaled slowly. So you protected him, he said. A tear slid down her cheek. Yes. Silence filled the room again. Not hostile, not loud, just final. Jonathan turned slightly, walking a few steps away, then stopped. He told me about the plan, he said. Emily closed her eyes. Of course he did. When were you going to leave? Jonathan asked. Her lips trembled. In a month, she admitted. He nodded once. Without the kids? He asked. That broke her. No, she said quickly. No, I would never. You already did, he said quietly. She stopped because she knew. He wasn't talking about physically leaving. He meant something deeper, something she couldn't argue with. I thought I could fix it, she said weakly. I thought I had time, that I could figure it out before everything fell apart. Jonathan looked at her again. It already had, he said. She nodded. I see that now. Another silence. Then, what happens now? She asked. Jonathan didn't answer immediately, because this part wasn't about anger. It was about what remained after everything was stripped away. Finally, he spoke. We move forward, he said. She frowned slightly. How? Jonathan met her eyes, separately. The words settled between them, heavy, unavoidable. Emily lowered her gaze. I understand, she whispered, and for the first time. She truly did. Jonathan turned toward the door, then paused. I meant what I said, he added without looking at her. About the kids. She looked up quickly. I won't take them from you, he continued, but I won't let this affect them either. Tears filled her eyes again. Thank you, she said. He nodded once, then opened the door and left. Emily remained standing in the middle of the room, alone. Not abandoned, but finally. Facing the consequences of every choice she had made, and understanding. Too late. That some things don't break all at once. They unravel slowly. Until there's nothing left to hold together. 48 hours passed slower than Jonathan expected, not because he was uncertain, but because everything now depended on what Mark would do next. He didn't call. He didn't chase. He didn't send reminders. He waited. On the second evening, just after sunset, Jonathan's phone vibrated. A single message. Check your email. Nothing more. Jonathan didn't open it immediately. He stood by the window for a moment, watching the fading light stretch across the street, then slowly walked to his desk and sat down. Only then did he open his laptop. The email was short. Attached files. No explanation. No apology. Jonathan opened the first document, account statements, multiple accounts, layered transfers, complex routing, but at the bottom. The result was clear. Funds were being moved back. He opened the next file and the next. Each one confirmed the same thing. Mark was complying, not out of guilt, not out of regret, out of necessity. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. It wasn't over yet, but the balance had shifted completely now. For the first time since all of this began. He felt something close to resolution. The next morning he returned to the office early, again, but this time he didn't go straight to his desk. He went to Mark's office, opened the door without knocking. Mark was already there. He looked worse, tired, unshaven. Eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. Did you get everything? Mark asked. Jonathan stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I did. A pause and, Mark pressed. Jonathan studied him. This man had been his partner, his friend, someone he trusted enough to build a future with. Now, he was just a liability. You'll continue transferring the rest, Jonathan said, until it's complete. Mark nodded slowly. It will be. Another silence, then. What happens after that? Mark asked. Jonathan didn't answer immediately, because now, this part mattered more than the money. You resign, Jonathan said finally. Mark's jaw tightened. Effective immediately, Jonathan continued. You'll sign everything, full admission of misconduct, no disputes. And if I don't? Mark asked. Jonathan met his eyes. You already know. That was enough. Mark looked away. And the police? He asked quietly. Jonathan held his gaze for a moment, then said, That depends on you. Mark exhaled, long, heavy. I'll sign, he said. There was no fight left in him now, only damage control. Jonathan nodded once. Good. He turned toward the door, but before leaving, he stopped. For what it's worth, Mark said behind him, his voice quieter now, stripped of its usual confidence. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Jonathan didn't turn around. It always does, he replied, and walked out. A week later, everything had changed. Mark Carter was no longer part of the company. Officially, he had resigned. Unofficially, he had disappeared. The money had been returned, almost all of it. Enough to stabilize the business, enough to prevent public exposure, externally. Nothing had happened. The company continued. Clients came and went. Deals were signed, but internally. Jonathan knew the truth, and he carried it quietly. Emily had moved into a small apartment across town. The children spent time with both of them, carefully structured, carefully explained. They didn't ask too many questions, but they understood more than they said. And Jonathan adjusted to the silence, to the space, to the absence. It wasn't easy, but it was clean. No lies, no hidden conversation, no shadows in the house, just truth. And sometimes that was enough, but not always, because some endings don't feel like endings. They feel like something unfinished. And Jonathan knew. This wasn't just about what he had lost. It was about what he would become after it. And that part was still being written.